Welcome to Order Before Modern Systems. Here, we explore how everyday order functioned before modern systems, institutions, and formal rules existed. This channel examines how routine, habit, and shared expectations shaped daily life long before modern organization took form. For most of human history, people did not depend on a professional police department, a modern courtroom, or a prison system to feel protected. Instead, they depended on something simpler, knowing what to expect. Predictability felt safe because it reduced risk. When daily life was full of hazards, fire, hunger, disease, theft, violence, and sudden conflict, any system that made outcomes more regular helped people plan, avoid trouble, and survive. Predictability did not always mean fairness. It did not always mean kindness, but it often meant that rules were known, procedures were familiar, and everyone understood what would likely happen if certain lines were crossed. This documentary-style explanation explores why predictability created a sense of safety before modern systems. We will look at how older communities built predictable patterns of control through shared responsibility, public routine, local courts, set punishments, and organized watch systems. We will compare several historical settings, not to claim they were the same, but to show a common idea. When people could forecast how a dispute or crime would be handled, they felt less exposed to sudden danger. First, it helps to define what safe meant in pre-modern life. Today, safety often means that an outside institution will respond quickly, gather evidence, and enforce rules the same way for everyone. In earlier periods, many dangers were immediate and personal. A thief might steal tools needed for farming. A fight might turn deadly. A fire might destroy a neighborhood. A traveler might be a threat or might be threatened. The biggest fear was often not a single crime, but uncertainty. Not knowing if help would come, not knowing whether a powerful person could act without limits, and not knowing what process would follow. Predictability reduces that uncertainty in three main ways. 1. It sets expectations. If people know what counts as wrongdoing, they can avoid it. If they know how accusations are made, they can prepare a defense. If they know what penalty will follow, they can judge risks. 2. It limits random violence. Even harsh rules can reduce private revenge if communities accept that disputes go into a known process. 3. It organizes cooperation. In many pre-modern systems, there were not enough officials to watch everyone. The system worked only if ordinary people joined in. Predictable duties, who must respond, who must report, who must serve watch, made that cooperation more reliable. With that foundation, we can look at how predictability was built into older systems of crime control and justice. A key point is that pre-modern justice often depended on local people, not specialists. In many societies there were officials like sheriffs, magistrates, city watch leaders, or judges. But their reach was limited. Roads were slow. Communication was slow. A single officer could not investigate everything. So systems were designed to work with what communities already had: neighbors, kin groups, village meetings, guilds, and local courts. That is why predictable routines mattered. If a system requires community participation, people need clear signals and rules. They need to know when they are obligated to act and what happens if they do not. One of the clearest examples comes from medieval England and the idea of shared responsibility. In parts of medieval English life, order was supported by group responsibility systems, where people were organized into small units that promised good behavior and promised to produce wrongdoers for court. This kind of system is often described as mutual surety. The idea is straightforward. If one person commits an offense and disappears, the group can be punished or fined, so the group has a strong reason to prevent wrongdoing and to bring suspects forward. This structure makes life more predictable in several ways. It creates clear pressure inside the community. Neighbors have reasons to discourage risky behavior. It is not just a personal matter, it can cost the whole group. It creates a predictable path from suspicion to action. If someone is accused, there is a known expectation that the group must respond. It also reduces the need for constant patrol by officials. Instead of relying on a distant authority, the community uses a built-in rule. You are connected to others, and that connection comes with duties. In medieval England, another predictable mechanism was the hue and cry. In this practice, when a crime was witnessed, people were expected to raise an alarm and call neighbors to pursue the suspect. The important part for predictability is not just the chasing. It is the clear rule that the community must respond. People knew that if an alarm was raised, they were supposed to join in. Whether this worked well in every case is not the point here. The point is that the rule itself was simple and understood. An immediate wrong triggers an immediate group response. That made the community feel less helpless, because it promised that wrongdoing would not be treated as a private problem. Predictability also appeared in organized watch routines. Before modern policing, many towns used forms of watch and ward, where residents took turns watching at night, guarding gates, and paying attention to suspicious movement. In some legal traditions, night watchmen could detain people found outside at night, especially strangers, until morning for examination. This kind of rule often sounds harsh today, but it made certain risks more manageable in its own setting. In a world without street lighting, without fast identification, and without quick background checks, nighttime movement was harder to interpret. A predictable routine, gates closed at certain hours, watchmen present, questioning of strangers, reduced uncertainty. It signaled to residents that the night had structure. When people can predict how a town behaves at night, they can plan safer movement and reduce surprise. Even if the system sometimes harmed innocent travelers, it still created a shared expectation that the town was not simply open and unguarded. Predictability also shaped the investigation process. Modern investigation relies on specialized training, forensic science, and professional detectives. Older systems often relied on public knowledge, reputation, and sworn statements. A major reason predictability mattered here is that a community needs a stable method to turn rumor and suspicion into a formal accusation. Without that, any conflict could become a dangerous private feud. In medieval English legal development, one method that helped formalize accusation was the presenting jury system associated with reforms under royal justice. In this approach, groups of local men were required to report, under oath, who in their area was suspected of serious crimes. This is not the same as a modern trial jury. Instead, it helped officials identify suspects and start formal procedures. This kind of structure made outcomes more predictable in at least two ways. First, it made accusation less personal. Instead of a lone accuser risking retaliation, the accusation could come through a community process. Second, it made the state's response more regular. If the procedure requires sworn presentment, then serious wrongdoing is more likely to enter a known pathway, even if evidence standards were different than today. Older courts also contributed to predictability. In many rural areas of medieval Europe, local courts met at set times during the year. They handled minor disputes, local offences, and community regulation. People knew when the court would meet, who would be present, and what kinds of issues could be raised. This schedule itself is a form of safety. It means a dispute is not endlessly floating in the air, with people waiting for the other side to strike. There is a known place and time to bring a complaint. These courts could also enforce predictable economic rules. For example, local authorities in many societies monitored markets, weights, measures, and trade behavior. This mattered because food and supplies were survival issues. If trade rules are unpredictable, then daily life becomes unstable. In parts of the medieval Islamic world, for instance, there were officials connected to the supervision of markets and public behavior. Their duties could include checking weights and measures and maintaining public order in commercial spaces. Again, this is not about claiming perfect enforcement. It is about the value of the role. When buyers and sellers know that some official inspection can happen, trade becomes less risky. Predictability supports trust, and trust supports daily survival. Now consider ancient Rome, where a large city created different problems. Rome faced frequent fires, crowded housing, night crime, and public disorder. One Roman response was to develop organized services that combined fire response and nighttime watch functions. A predictable night watch and fire response system does two things. First, it reduces panic by making hazards feel managed. A fire can still destroy buildings, but a standing service creates the expectation that someone will respond. Second, it reduces random street danger at night. Even limited patrols provide a sense that public space is not fully abandoned after dark. In a dense city, predictability is especially important because strangers are common. In a village, most people recognize each other. In a city, unknown faces are normal. That makes trust harder, so cities often rely more on uniformed roles, posted watch points, and set rules for public behavior. Beyond specific institutions, predictability also came from standardized punishment. In many pre-modern systems, penalties were public, physical, and meant to send a clear signal. Public punishments are often described as cruel, but they served a practical function in systems with limited imprisonment and limited supervision. A predictable punishment schedule sends a simple message: certain acts lead to certain outcomes. When people believe that punishments are stable and known, they can better judge what risks others might take. This predictability can reduce fear in a narrow way. If penalties are known and consistently applied, it becomes less likely that someone will harm you and then disappear without consequence. Style that does not guarantee justice, but it creates a kind of stability. Another major source of predictability was collective monitoring. When there is no modern identification system, communities use what they have: local knowledge. Who belongs, who is new, who is in debt, who has enemies, who has a violent reputation. Social memory can be unfair, but it is also a form of informal investigation. People used it to decide whom to trust and whom to watch. Some states tried to formalize collective monitoring by organizing households into responsibility groups. In Imperial China, for example, community-based grouping systems were used at different times to maintain local order, collect taxes, and keep track of households. Such systems grouped families into units with leaders responsible for reporting problems and enforcing certain rules. From the perspective of predictability, the main effect is that communities are not left to guess who must act. The group structure assigns responsibility. It creates a chain. Household heads answer to group leaders, who answer to higher officials. Even if enforcement varied, the design aimed to make local order a routine administrative task. Predictability also shaped how people moved through space. Travel was risky. A traveler might be robbed or accused. Inns, markets, and town gates were key points of control. Many places developed predictable controls over movement. Gates closed at night, travelers questioned, strangers watched, and local residents responsible for reporting suspicious persons. This reduced one kind of fear, the fear that outsiders could enter unnoticed. It increased another risk, the risk that strangers would be treated with suspicion. But in small, vulnerable communities, the desire to reduce surprise often outweighed the desire to welcome movement. The same idea applies to weapons and local defense. In many times and places, adult men were expected to have some role in defense, sometimes through arms requirements or militia service. When attack, banditry, or unrest was possible, communities wanted to know that there was a plan. A predictable defense obligation made people feel less alone. It also made it clearer who would be blamed if the community failed to respond. Now, it is important to be clear about what predictability could not do. Predictability could not remove poverty, disease, or hunger. It could not stop every crime. It could not guarantee that the powerful would not abuse their position. In fact, predictability sometimes protected the powerful more than the weak. If the known rules are written to favor certain classes, then predictability can mean predictable unfairness. But even then, predictable unfairness can still feel safer than total uncertainty. A poor person might prefer a harsh but known tax rule to a situation where officials can demand anything at any time. A merchant might prefer strict market inspection to a marketplace where cheating is unchecked. A villager might prefer being part of a mutual responsibility group, even if it feels intrusive, rather than living in a place where crime is simply ignored. This leads to a deeper point. Predictability is not the same as freedom. Pre-modern systems often created safety by limiting choices. Curfews, watch routines, group responsibility, and public penalties all restrict personal freedom. Yet they create a shared environment where most people understand the boundaries. From a systems viewpoint, that shared understanding reduces the cost of decision-making. If you know that the market inspector will check measures, you do not have to inspect every seller yourself. If you know that a night watch will challenge strangers, you do not have to confront strangers personally. If you know that your tithing or household group must answer for you, you know there will be pressure to behave in ways that avoid community punishment. Predictability shifts some of the burden of safety from individual action to system routine. Another reason predictability felt safe is that it reduced conflict escalation. Without predictable justice, disputes can grow. A theft leads to retaliation. Retaliation leads to counter-retaliation. One injury becomes a chain of violence. When a community accepts that there is a known procedure, raise an alarm, bring the matter to the court at its next sitting, present witnesses, pay a fine, provide surety, then disputes are more likely to be contained. Even if the procedure is imperfect, it can replace the most dangerous alternative, endless private revenge. Predictability also supported reconciliation and continued coexistence. In small communities, people cannot simply move away after a conflict. They must continue living near each other, trading, marrying, sharing roads and working fields. A predictable process offers an exit ramp from conflict. Once the fine is paid or the decision is made, the community can treat the matter as settled. That closure is a kind of safety. Now let us look more closely at what knowing what to expect meant in everyday life. It meant knowing who had authority. In many places, authority was layered. Household heads, village elders, local courts, religious officials, lords, city magistrates, royal judges. People did not always like these authorities, but they knew who they were and what roles they played. A predictable hierarchy reduces confusion. When something goes wrong, people can choose a route, first speak to a neighbor, then go to a local official, then bring it to a court. It meant knowing when public order was on duty. Modern policing is continuous, but older systems were often scheduled. Watch duty might rotate. Courts might sit twice a year. Markets might have official oversight on market days. Schedules create predictability. They tell people when to handle business, when to keep disputes quiet, and when to avoid risky travel. It meant knowing what evidence counted. Modern evidence is often physical and technical. Older evidence was often social, oaths, reputation, eyewitness reports, and local knowledge. That can be unreliable, but it is predictable. People know which kinds of proof matter in their setting. They know the weight of an oath. They know that certain person's testimony may carry more influence. This predictability can be unfair, but it reduces uncertainty about procedure. It meant knowing what punishment looked like. In many periods, punishment aimed to be seen and understood, fines, public shaming, corporal punishment, exile, or in severe cases, execution. The public nature was part of the system's communication. It told the community this act has a known outcome. That message is meant to calm fear by showing that wrongdoing triggers a response. It meant knowing what the community expected from you. In systems of shared responsibility, safety is not a service you receive. It is a duty you perform. You may have to join a chase. You may have to stand watch. You may have to report wrongdoing. You may have to guarantee a neighbor's appearance in court. Predictability here is the knowledge that everyone is under similar obligations, and that refusing those obligations can bring consequences. There is also a psychological side that does not require modern psychology terms. When life is unpredictable, people use more energy scanning for threats. They avoid travel. They avoid trade. They distrust strangers. They may respond quickly with violence because they fear delay will leave them exposed. Systems become predictable. People can take calculated risks. A merchant can carry goods, believing theft will at least trigger a pursuit. A farmer can leave tools out, believing the community will respond if they disappear. A traveler can choose a route based on where gates close, where watchmen patrol, and when markets operate. Predictability does not remove danger, but it makes danger easier to measure. Now we can summarize how predictability created safety across different historical settings. First, predictability created safety by making enforcement a known routine, not an improvisation. Whether it was the community alarm of hue and cry, the scheduled meetings of local courts, or the organized patrols of urban watchmen, the key was that response followed a pattern. Second, predictability created safety by spreading responsibility. In mutual surety systems and household group systems, the group is responsible for producing suspects and discouraging wrongdoing. This reduces the chance that crime becomes a purely private battle. Third, predictability created safety by turning suspicion into a formal process. Presentment systems, sworn reports, and recognized court procedures helped convert local knowledge into official action, even if the standards were different from modern ones. Fourth, predictability created safety by controlling space and time. Curfews, gates, and night watches structured the most dangerous hours. Market oversight structured trade. Even fire response organizations structured urban hazards. Fifth, predictability created safety by communicating consequences. Public penalties, fines, and visible enforcement sent signals meant to reduce uncertainty. People could see that wrongdoing had an end point. Finally, it is worth explaining why modern systems changed this older balance. As states grew stronger and cities grew larger, communities became less able to manage crime on their own. Social familiarity weakened. Movement increased. Evidence demands changed. Governments created more professional systems, salaried police, formal prosecution, professional judges, prisons, and standardized procedure. In theory, modern systems aim for a different kind of predictability: predictable rights, predictable due process, predictable investigation standards. But in older systems, predictability often came from routine obligation and local participation. So when we ask why predictability felt safe before modern systems, the answer is not that the past was calmer or less violent. Often it was more dangerous. The answer is that older societies built safety out of repeated patterns, shared duties, known procedures, scheduled courts, and visible consequences. Knowing what would happen next reduced risk in everyday life. It helped people decide when to speak, when to move, when to trade, and how to respond when conflict appeared. Predictability was a tool for survival. It was not always fair, and it was not always gentle, but it was understandable. And in a world where the worst danger was often sudden uncertainty, being able to predict the system could feel like a kind of protection.